The avoidant spends their entire adult life rejecting perfectly suitable partners who could love them deeply, dismissing genuine offers of intimacy from emotionally healthy people, and systematically destroying relationships with those who demonstrate unwavering devotion to their difficult personality and defensive patterns. Yet, there exists one specific type of person who can crack their psychological code, bypass their sophisticated defense systems, and inspire the kind of lifelong commitment that shocks everyone who knows the avoidance relationship history of emotional distance and strategic abandonment. This isn't the patient partner who tolerates their moods, the understanding soul who excuses their behavior, or the devoted lover who fights for their attention despite receiving emotional scraps in return. The person who captures an avoidance lifelong bond possesses a combination of qualities so rare and psychologically sophisticated that most people never encounter such an individual. And many avoidants live their entire lives without meeting someone who triggers their deepest capacity for authentic attachment and sustained emotional investment. Understanding who can create lifelong bonds with avoidance challenges everything most people believe about love, compatibility, and what it takes to reach someone who has spent decades perfecting the art of emotional distance. The answer isn't more love, more patience, or more understanding. It's a specific psychological profile that creates conditions where the avoidance defensive strategies become unnecessary, where their fear of intimacy transforms into desire for connection, and where their attachment wounds heal through encounter with someone who neither triggers nor tolerates their dysfunction. This person represents the avoidance perfect psychological match, someone whose own emotional architecture complements rather than threatens their defensive structure, who provides safety without suffocation, challenge without chaos, and independence without indifference. When the avoidant encounters this rare individual, their entire relationship paradigm shifts from strategic emotional management to authentic partnership, from defensive distance to chosen intimacy, and from fear-based attachment to secure connection that surprises everyone, including themselves. The mirror effect. Someone who matches their independence. The avoidant forms lifelong bonds only with individuals who possess genuine emotional independence that rivals or exceeds their own, creating a mirror effect where two self-sufficient people choose each other not from need, but from authentic appreciation for qualities they recognize and respect within themselves. This independence must be real rather than performed, effortless rather than strategic, and demonstrated through actions rather than declarations about their emotional self-reliance and autonomous lifestyle choices. This matching independence eliminates the avoidant's primary fear about intimate relationships, being consumed, suffocated, or made responsible for another person's emotional well-being and happiness. When they encounter someone whose life operates at full capacity without requiring external validation, emotional support, or constant reassurance, they discover that intimacy can enhance rather than threaten their autonomy, and that connection can strengthen rather than compromise their individual identity and personal freedom. Understanding this mirror effect means recognizing that the avoidant doesn't need someone who adapts to their independence, but someone who embodies it naturally, whose emotional self-sufficiency stems from genuine psychological health rather than defensive strategies designed to avoid vulnerability. This person's independence feels familiar yet intriguing, comfortable yet challenging, creating psychological resonance that allows the avoidant to relax their defensive vigilance while maintaining their sense of personal power. The mirror effect operates through mutual recognition of shared values about personal autonomy, emotional regulation, and the importance of maintaining individual identity within intimate relationships. Both people understand that healthy partnership requires two complete individuals choosing to share their fullness rather than two incomplete people seeking completion through emotional fusion that destroys the very independence that makes them attractive to each other. This independence matching also creates a natural relationship rhythm where both people appreciate space, understand the need for individual pursuits, and don't interpret temporary distance as rejection or abandonment. The avoidant encounters someone who gives them room to breathe while never appearing needy for their return, someone who maintains their own life momentum regardless of the avoidant's emotional availability or relationship investment. Most significantly, the mirror effect person possesses independence that includes the ultimate freedom, the ability to walk away from unsatisfying relationships without devastation, to choose partners based on enhancement rather than necessity, and to maintain self-respect over romantic attachment when those values conflict. This independence eliminates the avoidance sense of power through emotional withholding, because withholding has no effect on someone who doesn't need what's being withheld. The matching independence also extends to emotional regulation, where both people manage their internal states without requiring external intervention, support, or management from their partner. The avoidant encounters someone who handles their own emotional processing, maintains their psychological equilibrium during stress, and doesn't create relationship drama that requires crisis management and emotional repair work. Understanding this mirror effect reveals why the avoidant often feels simultaneously attracted to and intimidated by such individuals. They recognize someone who could potentially understand their psychological makeup while possessing the emotional strength to challenge their limitations rather than simply accommodating them. This creates optimal conditions for genuine growth and authentic connection. The independence mirror becomes most powerful when it includes intellectual autonomy, where both people maintain their own thoughts, opinions, and perspectives without requiring agreement or validation from their partner. The avoidant encounters someone who thinks independently, makes decisions confidently, and doesn't need their approval or input for personal choices that don't affect the relationship directly. This matching independence ultimately creates the psychological safety the avoidant needs to lower their defenses. They're with someone who won't disappear into the relationship, won't lose themselves in love, and won't make the avoidant responsible for their happiness or emotional stability. This safety paradoxically allows deeper intimacy because neither person fears losing themselves through connection with someone who respects and maintains healthy boundaries. The mirror effect person demonstrates through consistent behavior that independence and intimacy aren't mutually exclusive, that two strong people can create something beautiful together without sacrificing the individual strength that made them attractive initially. This living proof that healthy relationships enhance rather than diminish personal power becomes irresistible to someone whose entire defensive system was designed to protect their autonomy from relationships they believed would inevitably destroy it. The challenge factor? Never fully conquered. The avoidant bonds for life only with someone who maintains an element of mystery and challenge that prevents the relationship from falling into predictable patterns where the avoidant's interest wanes due to complete conquest and emotional familiarity. This person must possess depths that continue revealing themselves over time, complexity that defies easy categorization, and personal evolution that keeps them perpetually interesting to someone whose attachment system requires stimulation to maintain engagement and investment. This challenge factor operates not through game playing or strategic unavailability, but through genuine personal complexity that includes ongoing growth, evolving interests, and intellectual depth that provides endless discovery opportunities for someone whose psychological makeup craves novelty and mental stimulation. The avoidant encounters someone who cannot be completely figured out, fully possessed, or taken for granted because they continue developing in ways that maintain intrigue. Understanding this element means recognizing that the avoidant's nervous system requires a certain level of uncertainty to maintain romantic and emotional engagement, that complete predictability triggers boredom and withdrawal, and that their ideal partner must balance accessibility with elusiveness in ways that feel natural rather than manufactured. This person provides security through consistency while maintaining excitement through personal growth and change. The challenge manifests through intellectual stimulation, where conversations never become routine, where the person's thoughts and perspectives continue evolving, and where debates and discussions provide mental exercise that keeps the avoidant engaged and curious about their partner's internal world. This intellectual challenge prevents the relationship from becoming emotionally or mentally stagnant for someone whose attachment style requires ongoing stimulation. This factor also includes the person's refusal to be completely available or entirely accessible, maintaining aspects of their life, thoughts, and experiences that remain private or shared selectively. The avoidant encounters someone who reveals themselves gradually rather than immediately, who maintains personal boundaries that create natural mystery without withholding, designed to manipulate or control the relationship dynamic. Most importantly, the challenge factor includes the person's own capacity for growth and change that ensures they never become the same person the avoidant initially fell in love with, while simultaneously maintaining core qualities that provide relationship stability. This evolution keeps the avoidant curious about who their partner is becoming rather than bored with who they've always been. The never fully conquered element also operates through the person's independent goals, ambitions, and life trajectory that exists alongside but separate from the relationship, ensuring they remain a moving target rather than a static presence in the avoidant's life. Their continued development in areas that don't include the avoidant maintains the sense that there's always more to discover, understand, and appreciate. Understanding this challenge factor reveals why many patient, available, and predictable partners fail to maintain the avoidant's long-term interest. They remove the uncertainty and stimulation that the avoidance attachment system requires for sustained engagement. The person who creates lifelong bonds provides enough stability to feel safe while maintaining enough unpredictability to remain interesting. The challenge becomes most effective when it stems from the person's authentic complexity rather than strategic behavior designed to maintain the avoidance interest. Their mystery emerges from genuine depth rather than withholding, their elusiveness from natural boundaries rather than manipulation, and their unpredictability from personal growth rather than gameplay designed to prevent boredom or complacency. This factor ensures that even after years together, the avoidant continues discovering new aspects of their partner's personality, thoughts, and capabilities that prevent the relationship from falling into complete familiarity that triggers their tendency toward emotional distance and strategic withdrawal. The person remains perpetually fascinating rather than eventually boring to someone whose attachment style equates complete knowledge with diminished value. Emotional intelligence without emotional neediness. The avoidant forms lifelong bonds with individuals who possess sophisticated emotional intelligence that allows them to understand, interpret, and respond appropriately to complex psychological dynamics while maintaining their own emotional center and never becoming dependent on the avoidant for regulation, validation, or psychological stability. This combination of emotional sophistication and emotional independence creates the perfect conditions for the avoidant to feel understood without feeling burdened by someone else's emotional needs or instability. This emotional intelligence manifests as the person's ability to read the avoidant's defensive patterns, understand their attachment wounds, and respond to their emotional signals with appropriate empathy while never taking their behavior personally or becoming emotionally reactive to their withdrawal strategies. They possess the psychological sophistication to see through defensive behaviors to underlying needs while maintaining enough emotional detachment to avoid being triggered or wounded by avoidant patterns. Understanding this quality means recognizing that the person can provide emotional support without becoming emotionally needy, can offer understanding without requiring reciprocal emotional labor, and can navigate complex relationship dynamics without creating drama or crisis that demands the avoidant's immediate attention and emotional management. They serve as an emotional anchor without becoming an emotional burden. The intelligence includes their capacity to communicate about feelings without becoming overwhelming, to address relationship issues without creating emotional chaos, and to express their needs without making those needs the avoidance responsibility to fulfill immediately or completely. They understand emotional timing, appropriate intensity levels, and how to create emotional safety for someone whose defensive system interprets emotional expression as potential threat. This person also possesses emotional intelligence about their own patterns, triggers, and needs, managing their internal world with sophistication that doesn't require external support or intervention from someone whose emotional capacity remains limited by their attachment wounds. They don't expect the avoidant to heal their insecurities, process their emotions, or provide constant reassurance about relationship security and their worth as a partner. Most significantly, their emotional intelligence includes understanding that the avoidant's defensive behaviors stem from attachment trauma rather than personal rejection, allowing them to maintain compassion and appropriate boundaries without becoming codependent or sacrificing their own emotional well-being. For someone who cannot provide reciprocal emotional support and availability, the intelligence extends to their ability to create emotional safety for the avoidant through consistent, calm responses that don't punish withdrawal while also not rewarding emotional unavailability. They understand how to maintain their own emotional equilibrium while providing stable presence that allows the avoidant's nervous system to gradually relax and trust that emotional expression won't be met with overwhelming reactions or demands. Understanding this combination reveals why emotionally intelligent but needy partners fail with avoidance. Their intelligence is compromised by their emotional dependency, making them ultimately overwhelming despite their psychological sophistication. The person who creates lifelong bonds possesses emotional wisdom without emotional desperation, understanding without neediness. The emotional intelligence also includes their ability to appreciate the avoidant's nonverbal expressions of care, to understand love languages that don't include constant verbal affirmation or emotional display, and to recognize genuine affection through actions rather than requiring traditional romantic demonstrations that trigger the avoidant's vulnerability, anxiety, and defensive responses. This person understands that emotional intimacy with an avoidant requires patience, consistency, and the ability to find satisfaction in gradual emotional opening rather than immediate emotional fusion. Their intelligence allows them to work with rather than against the avoidant's attachment style, creating conditions where natural emotional evolution can occur without force or manipulation. The secure base paradox, safety without suffocation. The avoidant bonds for life only with someone who can provide the psychological safety of a secure base while simultaneously maintaining enough emotional space and independence that the avoidant never feels trapped, consumed, or suffocated by the very security they desperately crave but have learned to fear. This paradoxical combination requires someone who understands that safety for an avoidant means knowing they can always leave while choosing to stay, that security comes through freedom rather than possession, and that the deepest intimacy emerges when someone feels completely free to be themselves without judgment or attempts at control. This secure base function operates through the person's ability to provide consistent emotional presence without demanding reciprocal intensity, to offer reliability without creating obligation, and to maintain steady availability without requiring the avoidant to match their level of investment or emotional expression. They become a safe harbor that never transforms into a prison, a refuge that remains accessible without becoming mandatory or expected as the avoidant's primary source of emotional regulation. Understanding this paradox means recognizing that the person creates safety through their own emotional stability and self-regulation rather than through controlling or managing the avoidant's behavior, moods, or relationship choices. They provide secure attachment by being securely attached themselves, comfortable with their own company, confident in their own worth, and capable of maintaining their emotional equilibrium regardless of their partner's emotional availability or withdrawal patterns. The secure base includes their ability to remain emotionally consistent during the avoidance testing behaviors, withdrawal episodes, and defensive strategies without becoming reactive, punishing, or attempting to force intimacy through emotional confrontation or demands for greater connection. They understand that security for an avoidant requires knowing their partner won't collapse, become dramatic, or create crisis when faced with emotional distance or temporary unavailability. This person also provides safety through their lack of hidden agendas or attempts to change the avoidant's fundamental nature, accepting their partner's attachment style while maintaining their own boundaries and standards for treatment. They don't try to heal the avoidance wounds or fix their defensive patterns, instead offering consistent presence that allows natural healing to occur without pressure or expectation for transformation within specific timeframes. Most significantly, the secure base paradox includes the person's ability to provide emotional grounding without emotional ensnarement, to offer support without creating dependency, and to maintain connection without eliminating the space and freedom that makes connection feel safe rather than threatening to someone whose attachment wounds equate closeness with danger and vulnerability with inevitable abandonment or betrayal. The safety manifests through the person's emotional predictability, not boring predictability, but the reassuring consistency of someone who remains stable, rational, and available without becoming overwhelming or intrusive. The avoidant learns to trust that this person won't suddenly become needy, dramatic, or demanding when stress increases or relationship challenges arise that might typically trigger defensive responses. Understanding this paradox reveals why many well-intentioned partners fail with avoidance by providing either safety that feels suffocating or freedom that feels abandoning, never achieving the delicate balance that allows the avoidant to experience security without sacrifice of autonomy. The person who creates lifelong bonds understands that safety and freedom must coexist rather than compete within healthy relationship dynamics. The secure base also includes the person's ability to maintain their own life, interests, and emotional fulfillment independent of the relationship, ensuring they never become so invested in the avoidant's well-being that they lose their own center or begin requiring the avoidant to provide emotional services they cannot consistently deliver. This independence prevents the secure base from becoming an emotional burden or obligation. This paradox becomes most powerful when the person demonstrates through consistent behavior that love doesn't equal possession, that commitment doesn't require control, and that intimacy can deepen without eliminating the personal space and individual identity that makes each person attractive to the other. They prove that secure attachment enhances rather than threatens personal freedom and autonomy. The secure base function ultimately allows the avoidant to experience what they've never had. Someone who provides emotional safety without emotional demand, relationship security without personal imprisonment, and intimate connection without loss of self or sacrifice of the independence that defines their identity and sense of safety in relationships that have historically felt dangerous to their psychological survival. Authentic indifference to their approval. The avoidant forms lifelong bonds only with someone whose self-worth, happiness, and sense of identity operate completely independently of the avoidant's approval, attention, or validation, creating a dynamic where the person genuinely doesn't need the avoidant's positive regard to feel good about themselves or their choices. This authentic indifference to approval eliminates the power dynamic that typically characterizes avoidant relationships, where one person seeks validation while the other withholds it as a form of control and emotional protection. This indifference manifests through the person's ability to make decisions, express opinions, and live their life according to their own values and preferences without requiring the avoidant's agreement, support, or blessing. They maintain their own moral compass, aesthetic preferences, lifestyle choices, and personal goals, regardless of whether these align with the avoidant's approval or disapproval, creating a relationship between two people who enhance rather than complete each other. Understanding authentic indifference means recognizing that it stems from genuine self-confidence and internal validation rather than defensive posturing or strategic behavior designed to manipulate the avoidant's interest. The person truly doesn't need external approval because their sense of worth comes from internal sources, their own accomplishments, values, relationships, and personal growth rather than their partner's assessment of their choices or character. This indifference eliminates the avoidant's primary relationship control mechanism, the withholding of approval and validation that typically keeps partners working for their positive regard. When someone doesn't need their approval, the avoidant loses their usual position of power, while simultaneously feeling relieved of the burden of being responsible for another person's self-esteem and emotional stability through their validation. The authentic nature of this indifference becomes evident through the person's consistent behavior across various situations. They don't seek the avoidant's opinion before making personal decisions, don't modify their preferences to gain approval, and don't become emotional or reactive when the avoidant disapproves of their choices. Their independence of thought and action feels natural rather than performed for strategic purposes. Most significantly, this indifference includes the person's ability to disagree with the avoidant without fear of rejection, to maintain different perspectives without needing to convince or convert, and to accept that their partner may not approve of certain aspects of their personality or choices while remaining completely comfortable with themselves. This creates space for authentic relationship rather than performance designed to maintain approval. The indifference also extends to the person's emotional reactions. They don't require the avoidant's positive mood or emotional availability to maintain their own emotional equilibrium, don't take the avoidant's withdrawal personally, and don't modify their behavior to prevent disapproval or increase approval from someone whose opinion, while valued, doesn't determine their self-worth or happiness. Understanding this quality reveals why approval-seeking partners inevitably lose the avoidant's respect and interest. Their need for validation creates a power imbalance that the avoidant exploits through withholding, while simultaneously losing attraction to someone who demonstrates such dependence on external validation for their sense of worth and identity. The authentic indifference creates optimal conditions for genuine respect and attraction because the avoidant encounters someone who cannot be controlled through approval withdrawal, whose strength and self-possession remain constant regardless of the avoidant's emotional availability or investment level. This person's worth doesn't fluctuate based on relationship dynamics or their partner's moods. This indifference becomes most attractive when it coexists with genuine care and affection. The person doesn't need the avoidant's approval but genuinely enjoys their company, doesn't require validation but appreciates recognition when it's freely given, and doesn't depend on positive regard but values the relationship for its intrinsic qualities rather than its capacity to boost their self-esteem. The avoidant discovers they can relax around someone who doesn't need them to be anything other than themselves, who doesn't require performance or presentation to maintain positive regard, and who accepts their authentic self while maintaining their own authentic self regardless of approval or disapproval. This creates the psychological safety necessary for genuine intimacy to develop without the pressure typically associated with earning and maintaining someone's good opinion. The growth catalyst. Someone who inspires evolution. The avoidant bonds for life only with someone who serves as a natural catalyst for their personal growth and emotional evolution, inspiring them to become better versions of themselves, not through criticism, demands, or attempts to fix their limitations, but through the magnetic example of their own continuous development and the way their presence creates conditions where the avoidant's highest potential feels both possible and necessary. This person doesn't try to change the avoidant, but instead embodies the kind of growth that makes remaining stagnant feel like a waste of their own potential. This catalyst effect operates through the person's own commitment to personal evolution. They pursue growth in their career, relationships, emotional intelligence, and life experiences with genuine enthusiasm that creates an atmosphere where development feels exciting rather than threatening. The avoidant witnesses someone who approaches life as an ongoing adventure of self-discovery and improvement, making their own defensive stagnation feel increasingly uncomfortable and limiting. Understanding this catalyst function means recognizing that the person inspires growth through attraction rather than pressure, through example rather than instruction, and through creating opportunities rather than making demands. They invite the avoidant into higher levels of functioning by demonstrating what's possible when someone commits to becoming their best self while accepting their partner's journey at whatever pace feels authentic and sustainable. The growth inspiration manifests through the person's intellectual curiosity, emotional courage, and willingness to challenge themselves in ways that create natural motivation for the avoidant to examine their own patterns, limitations, and possibilities for development. They become a mirror reflecting not what's wrong with the avoidant, but what's possible when someone commits to growth and authentic self-expression. This catalytic presence includes the person's ability to have conversations that expand the avoidant's perspective, to ask questions that promote self-reflection without feeling intrusive or therapeutic, and to share their own growth experiences in ways that normalize the process of change while respecting the avoidant's autonomy to choose their own developmental path and timeline. Most importantly, the growth catalyst demonstrates that personal evolution enhances rather than threatens individual identity, that becoming better doesn't require abandoning core self, and that growth can strengthen rather than compromise the independence and autonomy that the avoidant values so highly. They prove that development serves self-actualization rather than conformity to others' expectations. The person also provides safe space for the avoidance growth experiments, supporting their attempts at vulnerability, emotional expression, or behavior change without making those attempts feel like commitments or permanent transformations that eliminate the avoidant's freedom to return to familiar patterns if growth feels overwhelming or threatening to their psychological safety. Understanding this catalyst role reveals why partners who directly confront the avoidance limitations or demand immediate change typically fail. They create resistance rather than inspiration, defensiveness rather than curiosity, and pressure rather than the safe exploration that genuine growth requires. The effective catalyst works with the avoidance psychology rather than against their defensive patterns. The growth inspiration becomes most powerful when it includes the person's ability to see and appreciate the avoidance potential without becoming attached to specific outcomes or timelines for development. They hold space for growth while accepting current reality, encouraging evolution while loving the person as they are rather than as they could become. This catalytic effect also includes the person's own vulnerability about their growth journey, sharing their struggles, uncertainties, and ongoing development in ways that normalize the messiness of personal evolution, while demonstrating that growth doesn't require perfection or elimination of human complexity and contradictions. The avoidant discovers that growth feels possible and desirable when it's inspired rather than demanded, when it serves their own self-actualization rather than someone else's comfort or expectations, and when it can happen gradually within a relationship that provides both challenge and acceptance, both inspiration and patience for the uneven process of psychological development. Timing and readiness, the perfect storm. The avoidance capacity for lifelong bonding depends not only on encountering the right person, but also on the convergence of optimal timing factors that create psychological readiness for authentic attachment. A perfect storm of personal maturity, life circumstances, and emotional availability that allows their defensive walls to lower enough for genuine connection to take root and flourish. Even the most perfectly compatible person cannot create a lasting bond with an avoidant who hasn't reached the psychological place where love feels safer than loneliness. This readiness typically emerges after the avoidant has experienced enough relationship failures to recognize their patterns without becoming too cynical to believe change is possible. When they've achieved enough personal success to feel secure in their individual identity while remaining open to enhancement through partnership, and when they've reached emotional exhaustion with their defensive strategies without falling into despair about their capacity for authentic connection. Understanding timing means recognizing that the avoidant must reach a point where their defensive strategies feel more limiting than protective, where isolation feels more painful than vulnerability, and where their attachment wounds have healed enough to allow experimentation with intimacy without triggering complete system shutdown. This readiness cannot be forced or manipulated, but emerges naturally through their own life experiences and psychological development. The perfect storm often includes external factors that create motivation for change, professional success that provides security, life experiences that highlight the cost of emotional isolation, or encounters with mortality that clarify what truly matters in life. These circumstances create windows of opportunity where the avoidant becomes more receptive to authentic connection than they've been previously. Personal readiness also involves the avoidant's recognition that their independence hasn't provided the satisfaction they expected, that their emotional walls have become a prison rather than protection, and that their capacity for love remains an underdeveloped aspect of their personality that deserves attention and cultivation. They must want something different than what their patterns have provided. Most significantly, timing includes the avoidant's development of enough emotional courage to risk disappointment, enough self-awareness to recognize their defensive patterns, and enough hope to believe that authentic connection might be possible without destroying their sense of self or compromising their autonomy and independence that defines their comfort zone. The readiness often emerges gradually rather than suddenly through accumulation of experiences that challenge their assumptions about relationships, love, and their own capacity for sustained emotional investment in another person's well-being and happiness. They begin questioning whether their defensive strategies serve their authentic desires or simply their fears. Understanding this timing explains why many perfect matches fail when timing is wrong. The right person at the wrong time cannot overcome psychological unreadiness, while decent compatibility at the right time can create lasting bonds that surprise everyone involved. Readiness often matters more than perfect compatibility for relationship success. The perfect storm also includes the avoidant's readiness to do the work that authentic partnership requires, to examine their patterns, communicate about their internal world, and invest sustained effort in building something beautiful with another person, rather than simply protecting themselves from potential emotional harm through sophisticated defensive strategies. This timing factor reveals why some avoidants never form lasting bonds despite encountering suitable partners. They never reach psychological readiness, never tire of their defensive strategies enough to risk change, and never develop motivation strong enough to overcome attachment wounds that make intimacy feel dangerous rather than healing. The convergence of right person and right timing creates conditions where the avoidant's capacity for love can finally emerge and flourish, where their attachment wounds can begin healing through experience of safe connection, and where their defensive strategies can gradually transform into tools for healthy relationship maintenance rather than barriers to authentic intimacy and genuine partnership.